Madoka.
Okay.
Oh boy, I have a lot of explaining to do. So these are Figma's Madoka Kaname, and they are old. They came out at around 2011, roughly the same time as the show itself. And you know what? These ain't bad for their age. But before we go any further, I'd like to adjust that I'll be only looking at the school uniform and magical girl figures of Madoka. So no Madoka over heaven. We don't want devils pulling gods down to the earth, if you know what I mean. So let's take a look at these before the FBI show up. First up, we have Madoka in her school uniform. Well, it's a school uniform, alright. A very well painted and sculpted one at that. Okay, you know what? I feel if so after saying that, I'm probably on some kind of list.
Now I know the joke you're gonna make, but just letting you know, I'm not a cupcake kind of person, I'm more of a brownie kind of person. That didn't help my case at all.
Allegations aside, what I mean to say is that the outfit looks like it came straight out of the show. The red on the bow, the cufflets, and at the bottom of the blouse are painted on very cleanly. But there are some little bits of paint on the right side of the bow.
Okay, the paint ain't exactly too clean. There is a little bit of a misalignment with the red line on the cufflets, but when you're looking at it at afar, it ain't too bad. The same thing goes for this part of the blouse, but other than that, it's fine.
The blouse itself even has sculpted in pockets. Now, one thing to note is that on the back of the figure there's an unpainted bow, which may throw people off of a building, but it's actually show accurate. However, to me, it would have been better if they colored it in, or not have it included at all, because I don't know what its purpose is on the uniform other than to make it look pretty. As for the skirt, the plaid design looks really well done. There doesn't seem to be any screw-ups, and it looks more like it's been printed on the skirt rather than painted on. Nonetheless, it looks pretty good. Moving down to the legs, the socks are also painted on very well, along with the shoes. Now, what you probably didn't know is that I just described all of the other Madoka Magica school uniform figures because they're mostly the same. Except for Kyoko apparently, because after Rebellion, someone at Good Smile Company probably had enough of making the same school uniform figure for the 5th time. I say that they're mostly the same, because rather than reuse the same sculpt for each character, they're all slightly different, like with proportions and minor paint detail. So overall, the figure looks well done. For accessories, you get 2 additional faces. Along with this open mouth smile, you get a sad face and a closed-eyed crying face, which is a perfect representation of what it's like watching the show. Geez, I get that it's a part of the character, but it makes me feel bad for buying the figure. But what I can say is that the eyes capture the art style of the show, which is something I like about Figma. You also get the usual set of Figma hands. Open hands, neutral hands, I guess, fists, which is kinda out of character for her to have, semi-open hands, and these grabbing hands.
Please don't ask why I have them positioned like that. It was just a coincidence. Please don't arrest me.
In addition, you get this special shoulder part. You simply and carefully remove the arm and swap out the shoulder. Now, what could this be used for? It's for putting garbage over her shoulder. Okay, I will say that the painting on Kyubey looks really good for his size, but these yellow rings around his ears have the potential to break. And when he's at this scale, it's kinda hard to avoid. Finally, you get this school bag, which comes with all the other school uniform figures.
The bag itself is painted on very nicely, but for some reason mine has this stress mark, or it's the paint rubbing off. I can't really tell.
Now, let's move on to something that you won't see until 10 episodes in, Madoka's magical girl form. As you can clearly see, it's very pink, like an Alaskan bullworm. Now, normally when I see this much pink on something, or anywhere for that matter, I go into cardiac arrest. But because I have this figure here, I could care less, life is overrated. As for the paint itself, it's also done very well. It's very bright and eye-catching. It's kinda what you think of when you hear the words magical girl together. The soul gem and the buttons are painted on there cleanly.
This third button isn't really aligned properly, and that last one is not looking very good. The light yellow on the side is a bit dirty, I will say that, but at the bottom here is another story. I'll tell you why in a sec.
The pink on her sleeves, cufflets, and ribbons look perfect, and these pointed segments that surround the skirt have this fade-out effect, which looks really good. The socks, along with the shoes, are also done well. But unfortunately, presumably due to age, this shirt part of the dress at the bottom isn't really doing so well. Due to the way that it's sculpted, and partially due to its design, this part slides into the skirt, which causes the paint to rub against it. Because of that, if you bend the chest too much, it'll apply too much friction to it, which causes the paint to rub off.
She also has this 5th button that I just found out about.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because overall, the figure looks pretty. I don't know how else to describe it. There's a sense of elegance to it. And you know what? I like it. For accessories, you get 2 additional faces. Along with this neutral happy face, you get a shocked face and a stern looking face. You also get the included hands. You get open hands, neutral hands, fists, loose grabbing hands, and tighter grabbing hands.
This pose still looks wrong to me. Why did I do this?
This allows her to hold her bows, one undeployed, which looks like a staff, and one activated bow in full bloom. And these little gems on the bow look very nice. The paint is shiny and looks very clean. Now I didn't say this earlier, but it should be known by now that I bought these figures used. So unfortunately, one of the bows came in the box broken. Yeah, these accessories are thin and fragile, which scares me because not only are they thin, but they're also very old too.
Not to mention the fact that the bow is kind of warped, which makes her grip kind of loose.
Speaking of thin accessories that give me anxiety, you get 4 arrows. To get her to hold an arrow, you get this special hand that allows the arrow to plug in.
It came in this bag. I don't know if it was from the original packaging or if it was from the previous owner.
This is very nerve-wracking because every time I do this, it always scares me. One minor slip-up can lead to one of these things breaking. But you wanna know what else is nerve-wracking? Accessories that are very small, like these grief seeds that you can have her hold. And finally, you get this little turd, whose tail was broken in the box. Now while I did glue it back together, the tail is a solid chunk that weighs down the rest of the body. I mean, it shouldn't since the bottom of it is flat, so it should have given it more area to rest. But with the way that it's sculpted, he'll always be leaning into his grave. Of course, as for all Figmas, they both come with bases and stands, and a sandwich bag to hold all of their accessories in.
Yeah, so for Magical Girl Monika's Figma bag, I accidentally ripped it here, which I have to say, I really don't like these kinds of Ziplocs. You kind of have to pry open the bag to get the contents out, and if one side is cleaned onto the bag, then it might be too tight and you might rip it off. You know, if anything, they should have just went with those slidey Ziploc bags. Those ones are so much better. Or, I don't know, make the connections a bit thicker.
The accessories for both figures are pretty good. It's not overly excessive or lacks anything, and the details on them are pretty good. The amount of accessories is standard. I don't know what else these things could come with. And you know what? It ain't that bad. Now let's get into articulation. For this I'll be using school uniform Madoka, and I'll get into why in a sec. The head can't really look up due to the head sculpt, but can look down and can rotate. The pigtails are on ball joints that can move in and out and can also rotate. The shoulders can rotate and can move in and out.
The shoulders can also shift up and down too.
The elbows can bend, along with the wrist, and it can also swivel. The chest can bend forwards and backwards, but due to the material used for school uniform Madoka, it's a bit limited. Fortunately, Magical Girl Madoka does this better, but with the cost of that previously mentioned front part.
And if you haven't noticed, the front part can also bend like this, which is really annoying when you're trying to pose her, but at least the paint isn't too affected.
Now we move on to the legs, and I'll explain why I chose to use school uniform Madoka. While the articulation may be the same for both figures, Magical Girl Madoka's leg movement is limited due to the sculpt of the skirt. The skirt is a solid block of plastic, which, while it may look nice, limits the range of the legs. It's wide enough for the legs to move around well, but it isn't at its full potential. With school uniform Madoka, the skirt uses a more flexible material and allows better leg movement. Speaking of leg movement, the hips can rock around, the thighs are on a ball joint, and can swivel.
Although I don't recommend you swivel it too much because the leg might actually pop off.
Finally, the knees can bend, along with the ankle. The posability on these figures is what I expect to see from a Figma figure, and it's done very well. Finally, let's scale her out. She's about 4.5 inches tall for both of her forms.
However, Magical Girl Madoka seems to be taller because of these heels.
Here's the Figma Sake Izuyoi, NECA SOS Goji, the Ember Collection Velociraptor, and some of the other members of the Holy Quintet. One interesting thing to note here is that the height for the figures is actually in scale of the characters from the show, which is a really cool detail to me. So do I recommend these figures? Yes, but only if you've seen the show. Context is important, especially in the case of Madoka Magica, but it's definitely worth the watch. As for those who are fans of the show, I suggest that you get both figures if you can. The school uniform figures of the characters are basically the equivalent of physical DLC, but in my opinion, getting both completes the experience. With the faceplates from both figures, it allows you to give more life to the character, and that's why I like the idea of it. To me, the more expressions you give a figure, the more lively it feels. Of course, you're gonna gonna have to find these things cheap because they can cost at least over $80 in some places.
Although I have seen some places on eBay where you have to pay $50 for them.
Not for me though, I got lucky. I had mentioned that I bought these figures used. It was at a store called Masaru Japan in Bangkok that sold Magical Girl Madoka for 539 baht, which when converted equals to, get this, $16 USD. That was an absolute steal!
That's how I also got Figma Madoka.
And with that being said, I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I'll see you guys in the next one, whenever that'll be. Okay, so I found out something amazing. Because Figma Hamura and Madoka's hands are skin toned, you can interchange their hands, except for her left hand for obvious reasons. That way you could have Madoka use Hamura's trigger finger hand. This is the best thing ever! Now you can have Madoka pop a cap in a witch's head.